Observe.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode number 15 of the Observe and Rapport Show. I'm Kyle Brennan, joined as ever by my beautiful co-host, Keith. Keith, how we doing today?
Couldn't be better, pal. Couldn't be better. I've realized that's like our, it's like my thing. I've said that every single time.
Couldn't be better?
Couldn't be better, pal. Couldn't be better. I say that every single time.
I guess that's good, but
It's going to be a shirt one day.
couldn't be better,
pal.
Yeah?
Yeah.
I guess that's good. There's nowhere to improve.
Yeah.
You're
I mean,
doing
how
fine.
much better can you be? We live in America, dude.
Yeah?
Yeah. I mean, speaking of America, did you see what happened in the, what was that? The Senate chamber? The controversy over there.
The sex tape.
Mm.
The sex. I didn't read into it at all. I just saw
boy.
a headline that there was a sex tape leaked of a congressional staff member or something.
I've talked on the show.
In the Capitol building.
Yeah. I've talked on the show about how I watch people get their heads cut off sometimes and stuff like that.
Yeah, sure.
So I go on those websites a lot.
Right, yeah. Those
And I
are
was like, oh,
bookmarked
this is-
for you?
Huh?
Those are bookmarked for you?
Yeah, you know, it's to me it just reminds you to be careful while driving and don't go to Brazil, things like that. You know what I mean? So but I knew it would be on there, the video, and I saw it. And
the video is out.
yeah, I saw it.
Wait, can you disclose what website this is that you're
It's
able
called the YNC.com. I don't know what YNC stands for,
Yeah.
but
This show is brought to you by YNC.com.
the YNC.com. By the way, we would do horribly on that website. Dude, it's important to be informed what's going on out there. Sometimes anyway, I saw the video and yeah, dude, the person filming, it's like the person
Oh, there was a third person there.
No, that's what I'm saying. The top, I guess.
Yeah.
He is like filming
it's
the act.
it's a POV.
Correct. And he's filming the POV, and then he lifts up, and you can tell it's the Senate chamber. He even goes to the back where the big crest is for the Senate, and you're like, dude, that's really it.
Wow.
They're really in there. But to this point,
Was it like his wife, or I feel like it'd be kind of lame if it was his wife.
Kyle,
it's
you don't
gotta
know.
be. I don't know any of this.
it's a gay man.
Oh, you didn't say that. No, when I said
Because it's
I
not obvious at
literally
first.
just saw the headline, like, you know, a newsletter.
Sex tape leaked,
and
yeah. It's a gay couple, and a couple. I don't know if they're a couple, but whatever. It was gay sex, dude, in the Senate hearing, and not the hearing, in the chamber. It's funny that everyone's making a big deal about this and whatever, and they should. You know, it's like, you know, it's kind of like a place where you shouldn't do that, right? Even if, like, no matter what kind of, it's sex, it's like something that's not supposed to be going on in there, right? And George Santos, the Republican guy who's been in a lot of trouble lately, he was getting grilled by some reporter about what he does. I'm so obviously chewing us in. I've never done it before. This is my first time.
It's hard to keep it in there.
Yeah,
when you're talking.
Anyway, but he said all the things they're going after him for. He goes, if you asked anyone in government these questions and grilled them the way you're grilling me right now, all of them would be guilty. All of these people out there who with the suits and the ties.
What kind of questions do you mean?
You know, just like, so how much have you ever lied? Where's the extent of your lying gone to? Have you lied about, collecting money? Have you lied about people you've,
Dude, these type of stories between Santos and this gay sex tape, did you watch House of Cards?
No.
You don't, I mean, House of Cards is a fictional show, but it is probably the most accurate depiction of what
it's like a
DC is
docuseries,
actually
people
like.
say. Yeah.
Because, like, I mean, in some of these shows about, like, you know, DC, whether it's West Wing or whatever, like, they dramatize everything, right? And you're like, oh, that would never actually happen. And everyone comes together and says, but, like, House of Cards, it's like vicious lying, like murdering, scandals, like back alley drug dealing and hookers. And you're like, when you watch it, you're like, this is a little out of touch and like exaggerated. But then you see stories like this and you're like, is it though?
No,
I'm pretty sure this is
that's
accurate.
what Santos was hinting at. He's like, let me tell you something. You think I'm some anomaly because I lied? Are you kidding me? He's like, bro, you don't even know what goes on.
You got to give him a little credit, because at least he was so just like, fuck it.
Yeah, he's like, well, I may as well ride the train and just, take.
I mean, he really, like, it was like he
may as well just been like,
He was like George Costanza with,
You know?
he's like, oh, you want to go there? We're going to go there.
Yeah,
Take the lie as far as you can possibly go until you caught with your pants down.
Yeah.
Like this guy was.
That was good. That was a good fun.
That actually just came off the top
joke.
of the head. I wasn't even planning that.
But yeah, so, and you know what? Is it a big deal? I mean, do I care?
Will anyone care in 2 weeks?
Exactly. Right? It's like Ukraine. No, I mean, no one gives a shit.
So it hasn't been disclosed who it was?
I don't think so. They said it's a Senate member a member of the thing. I don't know if
I just saw a congressional staff.
I mean,
member.
I don't know if that congressional.
So it could be a senator, it could be a rep.
But what if it's like the aide to a congresswoman or man, or like who?
I don't know.
But
hey, I mean, kind of a cool place to.
And dude, I knew a girl. Her dad used to work at this hospital on Long Island. So no, her boyfriend's dad, and he had keys to this hospital when they were young, and they'd go in there and have sex all the time in like the lobby, in like patients' rooms, like empty ones. So like I think this kind of thing goes on. Maybe there were people in there, in a coma. Maybe
clarify.
Who knows?
Ones, yeah.
But I think this kind of thing goes on more than you think it does.
Oh, I'm sure. I mean, I know stories of people in college going into classrooms and stuff, and I mean, people are nasty. People do it anyway.
People like doing it where you're not supposed to. That's a fun thing. It makes it hot, exciting, whatever. And especially at a place like that where you're like, tomorrow they've got a big hearing on immigration here, and then we're gonna.
It's a pretty cool place to have sex. I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah, I mean, can say you did that.
If you were to make like a top 10 list, I don't know if I'd put it in there, but it's got to be top 20 at least.
I looked into today, and this is gonna sound like bullshit, but I swear, me and my coworkers were talking about like crazy places to do it, and I looked because someone said, "What about skydiving? Do you think anyone's ever had sex while skydiving?" And they have.
I'm sure. Yeah, I'm sure. Whatever you could imagine, it's been done.
Yeah,
or tried.
Underwater. Like, I wonder what the deepest. Like that's definitely
submarine.
Like a
submarine.
Yeah, definitely on a submarine.
What is that? Like the 20 Leagues Under the Sea Club or something?
Sure. Not the Mile High Club. The 20 Leagues Under the Sea Club. Yeah, this kind of thing goes on all the time, dude. But yeah, that's America, baby. That's America.
Sure.
Speaking of America, I read a book about. It's not, directly related to America, but it did become that. I read The Social Contract by Jean-Jacques Rousseau.
Oh. What inspired you to read that?
Well, I was really looking into Shakespeare because I was, for some reason, getting into like sonnets and plays and like just, what it is? Because when you're a kid, they make you read Shakespeare. And you barely have a grasp on the English language.
Yeah.
And they expect you to digest this guy who's making up words half the time.
They really make you drink. They make you drink out of a fire hose. They're just like, all right, you just grasp, basic grammar.
Right. Here's to be or not to be. And you're just like, dude, I can't get a word of this in. So I decided to revisit that whole world of literature, and I got into it, but in Wikipedia, you're always going through like you click the next blue thing and the next blue thing. So it was like Renaissance, Enlightenment, and it got me to this guy, Jean-Jacques Rousseau. And
did you know anything about him prior?
I'd heard Rousseau. I've heard that name as like an important.
He has some like famous quotes, right? Like,
yeah.
What is it? Man is born
free, and everywhere he is in chains, which is the first sentence in the book that I read, The Social Contract by him. The Social Contract. First of all, Jean-Jacques Rousseau was a extremely influential, controversial, and innovative political philosopher, writer, composer, painter, like just one of those guys, right? Like a genius.
What time we talking? Like 1700s?
Yeah, 18th century. And he was, Napoleon admired him, George Washington, all our forefathers, all those kind of guys. And just people during the Enlightenment Revolution in general looked up to this guy as like a political theorist. And before we get into the book, I want to, just say, I want to read something from the first page because it's really important, because these days when you're having a political discussion or a discussion about the culture or society and where it's headed in general, inevitably in my experience, there's always somebody at the table or in the bar, wherever I'm having the conversation, that's either entirely silent Or if they do add anything to the conversation, it's something like, who cares what you think? Who cares what I think? What gives us the right to talk about this? Like, what difference does it make if we even have our opinions voiced to each other? Like, why can't we just let it go and let it be and organically progress on its own? To those people, I say this, and as does Rousseau. It's short. I mean to inquire if, in the civil order, there can be any sure and legitimate rule of administration, men being taken as they are, and laws as they may be. In this inquiry, I shall endeavor always to unite what right sanctions with what is prescribed by interest, in order that justice and utility may in no case be divided. Now, here's the important part. I enter upon my task without proving the importance of the subject. I shall be asked if I am a prince or a legislator to write on politics. I answer that I am neither, and that is why I do it. If I were a prince or a legislator, I should not waste time in saying what wants doing. I should do it or hold my peace. As I was born a citizen of a free state and a member of the sovereign, I feel that, however feeble the influence my voice can have on public affairs, the right of voting on them makes it my duty to study them. And I am happy when I reflect upon governments to find my inquiries always furnish me with new reasons for loving that of my own country. Now,
Beautiful.
it is beautiful. In other words, he's saying the fact that we have any rights at all to make a vote or raise your hand in agreement with things that get said on a public or in a town square, it gives you the duty to be informed, to care, to voice your opinion about things, even if you think, you know, you're not a politician, you're not someone who knows anything about political history or ideology or anything like that. You still need to care and voice your opinions. It's very important.
Yeah.
Because of people, he's one of those people, and he ended up influencing the type of government that we use here today, which is, like, you know, the American experiment, democracy, the systems we use today. It's easy to think that was always there now because it's been here for a few hundred years. We're all born into it, but that wasn't always there, man. It used to be a fucking, it was chaos out there, dude.
I know, and that's why I love reading history, because like you learn about like human nature and how it works today by reading history. And like I just read a similar book, actually. It's called I have it right here, a little history of philosophy by Nigel Warburton, and it's basically just like the history's like greatest thinkers, philosophers, political thinkers too. Rousseau's in here. There's a chapter on him, and it's just like 4 or 5 pages on each great, you know, thinker who changed kind of the social landscape of how people thought, how people put together democracy, right? So it starts with like Socrates and Plato, but then it goes into John Locke and Thomas Hobbes and Rousseau and Montesquieu and all these great guys. And when you read some of it, it's funny, like, you know, when you read like, you know, the Pythagorean theorem or like Newton's laws of physics, and like they sound really groundbreaking, but like, you know, 300 years later, you're kind of like, yeah, well, duh, like, of course,
right.
But when
an object in motion,
but when you try
motion,
but what I like reading about like history of stuff like this is like when you actually read it and put yourself in that time and realize like what Rousseau was saying to us
was
now,
revolutionary.
It sounds so obvious. Back then, people were like, oh shit, like.
Well, this book
like
was
people matter, and like our decisions and the way we.
The king isn't special.
Yeah, and like he wasn't born like with just great power and wisdom,
and
and like we're all of our opinions are worthy in some way, and like our minds can produce thoughts that, you know, can help one another and our family and be a community. And like it's just funny reading it and being like, like what, this guy was such a genius that he thought of that. But back then,
so I'm saying it's so easy to go now,
like I was, as you brought this up, I wanted to flip to, because I highlighted read some sections of this book, and the Rousseau one, it's hard to remember like what Rousseau said, because there's, like I said, there's like 50 philosophers in here, so I don't remember. So I wanted to visit some of the highlights. And yeah, man was born free, and everywhere he's in chains, he declares at the beginning of his book, The Social Contract. And then he talks about this thing called the general will.
The general will,
which
right.
is basically, he says that is the general will in capital G, capital W,
right, is
whatever is best for the whole community or the whole state. So basically, the general will is not, everyone says what they want if you ask them. That's what Rousseau will just call like the will of all. Like if I ask you what you want, you'll say whatever you want, and that's the will of all. But he said, in contrast, the general will is what people ought to want. So what would be good for the whole community, not just for each person within it thinking selfishly.
Correct. He says that in order for this to work, there's the individual liberties that we're all born with as free men, and but then you have to look outwardly if you're going to live in a community and consider what will be best for everyone in the community, not just for yourself.
And he was saying that the way that laws should be enacted are laws should basically declare ways to avoid being selfish.
Right.
In some, I'm paraphrasing. Shitty.
That is ultimately what he's trying to put.
Kind of like every law should be like, hey, don't be a selfish asshole. Like think about other people. Be generous. Be courteous.
Right.
We're all in this together. We're living in the same society.
Yeah. He made a very interesting, and this speaks to him as a philosopher to this point. He made a very interesting point in my opinion, that, because we tend to think that we as human beings have like this innate goodness in us. But what makes us moral creatures is our ability actually to ignore our natural instincts and consider what would be best otherwise than just to, feed into what you want to do in the moment. What makes us moral is our ability to reflect on a situation and consider a rational solution rather than, the one that you want right in this moment as like, my instinctual reaction.
Yeah.
So, and I always thought like, oh, that's interesting. Like you almost need a community to be moral. That was his argument. He's saying he described that, much like a relationship. It's analogous to that. Like for you to live in a society, a successful one, you have to sacrifice certain individual liberties for the greater, he called them, civil moral freedoms, the superior freedoms, he called them. And it's like being in a relationship where like there's great things about being single. There's a whole, list of things you consider pros about being single. But if you enter a good relationship, you have to sacrifice some of those things you would have if you were single in order to be in this successful and two people together in a relationship can accomplish, in these modern times, home ownership, a family, financial stability. Like it's much easier to create those scenarios for yourself if you're working with someone else. And he's like, think about the community that way. If we're all together in this, right? Like, and what I liked about the book is he explained why monarchies and aristocracies were the thing for such a long time. He explains how the first societies were the family. There's the parents and the kids, right? And children have an innate and instinctual desire to follow their parents, right? And look up to their parents and look to them for guidance and look to them for a means to accomplish certain things for themselves. The thinking was that if you branch that out broadly enough, the parents became the kings and the queens, and the children became the common people. And that relationship never really changed, where like they were the last word on everything. They run the show, and we all look to the monarchy to tell us what to do, to make the laws, to figure out how things are going to run the smoothest way. But as time went on with those, as centuries went on with that, there became, obviously, financial, like there was a big wealth gap where they had everything and everybody else was basically living in poverty, because that's just human nature. And eventually people started to go like, this isn't working. This just isn't working out, is it? Like we need something else, another way to live in a society where everybody can be more on a level playing field. And then people like this guy came along. And this book was actually banned in France and other places because, and you got to read the banned books, dude. Yeah, always read the banned books because they're good.
Yeah.
So they were banned because, kids are all of a sudden reading about how the king's not part of a natural hierarchy that people like Hobbes would talk about. They're actually just like you and me. They don't possess a godlike wisdom. They're no more special than I am. So why do I have to listen to him? So obviously this book got banned because they didn't want this whole thing. And it's funny because they banned it for a reason, because this is the kind of thing that inspired Napoleon, inspired the Enlightenment revolution in general. Just this kind of thinking to get this old way of doing things out.
Yeah, and that's what's interesting about reading this book is throughout history, you get all these profound thinkers who had different ideas about how the individual was supposed to flourish and how the society was supposed to flourish. And you had these guys who they stuck to their ideology in a way, but it moved the conversation forward of like one person, for example, would think everything you do in life should be about the individual prospering. So you should do everything that makes you feel better or that enhances your well-being. And then the next great thinker would come along and basically debate or challenge their ideas and say, no, what's best for the individual is what's best for the group. So we should try to purpose everything around the group, basically, and make sure everyone has, equal opportunity or equal advantages in life. And it was just interesting to see over time these ideas mesh and collide, and over time you get better and better thinking, and it's really cool. It's like I kind of want to go back and read some of those books that we learned about in like history class, and they'd be on like pop quizzes of like Machiavelli wrote like The Prince, or like some of the pamphlets back in like the days of the American Revolution. I don't remember who the big guy was who wrote like some really amazing pamphlet in the Revolution, but like a famous one. We know all the names of them. Yeah. But it would be cool to go back and read some of them. It might be difficult with like the ye old English and stuff, but it's just cool to think about how people were thinking in that time and what ideas were so new and revolutionary that literally a whole country was founded off.
Yeah. And it's relevant today. Like, it's, even though it happened a long time ago, it's relevant because the reason for a lot of the political discourse and a lot of the political, confrontations that take place now was already foreseen by Rousseau. Like, he was like, look, there's going to be issues with this. Like, for example, minorities. Like, there's always going to be, in any situation where there's a lot of people, the minority, whether it's because of their religion or because of their class or because of their ethnicity, whatever it is, someone's going to be left out. And But the idea was we need to do this regardless and figure that out along the way. And it's almost like we're there kind of now, where like they were like, inevitably this is going to hit a wall where people are like this. Unfortunately, these days there's no acknowledgement for the success, the insane success that this system has brought to the world in general. But they knew about all of these things that were going to be wrong with it too. It's just that sometimes you can't have everything in that. Like, would you rather have a king and a queen, or would you rather have a say? Would you rather at least have the vote? Would you rather that? Like, it's hard to make everything work perfectly. And that's, again, how, because of those issues, Karl Marx, Engels, when they wrote the Communist Manifesto the next century, it became such a big deal because they were like, well, this is how we're going to address those issues. And then they got rid of not got rid of, but they tried to unite the workforce and all that, so that the minority of the people would be in control and everybody would be on a even more level playing field. But then again, like, they took it too far, and a lot of those ideologies and theories led to a lot of bad things. Yeah.
The cool thing about this book, again, a little history of philosophy, is that it goes in order of time. So like I said, it starts with Socrates and ends with Peter Singer. And it says, like, the three biggest foundational shifts in human discovery were basically Copernicus, that the earth revolves around the sun. The second one was Charles Darwin and the theory of evolution. And then the third one was Sigmund Freud and like psychotherapy, the ability to analyze your thoughts. So it has all of those guys in there, but it also has all the political thinkers too.
Right.
And one that actually I found really interesting. Most of them I'd heard of, all these famous names you've heard of, you don't really know a ton about. So it's cool to just spark notes their stuff. But one guy who I really liked to read about was this guy, John Stuart Mill. And he was around in the 1800s, 1806, 1873. And he was essentially like the first libertarian thinker. So I don't remember because, again, there were so many people. So I'll read some of the highlights that I have in here. But one thing he says is like, In the right circumstances, human beings flourish, and that produces good consequences, not just for the individual concerned, but for the whole of society. It maximizes happiness. He says, every adult should be free to live as he or she pleases as long as no one else is harmed in the process. And like, he's the first guy to like say that, you know, like that's one of those things. He thought that greater happiness would come from individuals having greater freedom in how they behaved. And that was like revolutionary.
Right.
He's like, because think about monarchies, kings and queens. If the people are free, all hell is going to break loose. That's what they think. But he's actually the first person to say, no, the more individual personal freedom you give to each person, the more that actually advances, you know, creativity, inventiveness, community, because people are more free to pursue what they want. And it actually improves the economy, improves the well-being of society. And he hated what he called the tyranny of the majority, which was the way that social pressures work to prevent many people from doing what they wanted to do or become.
Yeah.
So like, it was just really cool. Like, he seemed to me like the most, like a guy who would be around today, and those ideas would still be kind of like populist in a way, where people would rally around that message. And you, like you said, like, we don't acknowledge enough the success of all of these, you know, the ideas that we've adopted from these great thinkers like Socrates, like Montesquieu, like Machiavelli, Rousseau. And what's cool is we're always trying to improve.
Right.
We're always trying to get down to the bottom of it and do like mental calculus of how can we be better. And I think that is, you know, if there's one thing that it seems like human beings were kind of made for, it's really constantly innovating, constantly finding new ways. We're never satisfied. Look at the iPhone. Like every year we need a new, more faster, more efficient, like cheaper. We're always trying to innovate. And that includes the ways of thinking, the way society and politics are formed.
We're always trying to do something. Dostoevsky said, even if there was, he goes, even if we ever do get this perfect society, the first thing we're going to do is fuck it up because we want to do something.
Yeah,
we want to work on something.
Yeah,
we need something to fix, something to make better.
We're like the girl who always goes for guys that they want to fix.
Yes,
right? Like that's what we are as a society. Like we always want to fix something.
Right.
Like we'll never be satisfied.
No,
we'll never get to a point.
Right.
And that's a good thing.
We'll
never get to the point where we go, perfect.
Done.
We're all done.
For eternity.
Yeah.
We're done.
Yeah.
And it's interesting you mentioned Mill. I didn't read him yet, but like it seems what he did was because Rousseau,
his book, by the way, sorry to cut you off. His book is called On Liberty. If you want to read that.
So in the social contract, he acknowledges the fact that, you know, the individual, you know, wants to have as much freedom as possible. And he says, though, the problem is that a lot of the time what your instinct is, even if it's a moral thing to you, it can be contaminated from your own biases, from your own personal experiences with things. So he asked basically the people of this society, in this hypothetical society, to consider the general will. And that's the idea of the general will, is that like you won't think inwardly, you'll think outwardly, and not you'll sacrifice, like I talked about, your individual freedoms and liberties for the greater, superior civil and moral freedoms that we will all share together. Civil moral freedoms, like for example, in a modern way of putting it, it gives a possibility for things like property rights. Because like in the natural world, in your natural freeborn, you know, freedom, you have your possessions, like whatever you're holding in your hand. Things like property rights and intellectual, like, you know, property, those things can't exist unless we're all on the same page as far as like what's moral, what's good, what's right and wrong. The fact that you can own a plot of land. Like remember when like there's that famous story of when we bought Manhattan from the Native Americans and they thought we were joking.
Yeah.
Because they didn't know that a human being could own land. That makes no sense, right? But we're coming from this place of thinkers like this and these kind of revolutionary thoughts and political theories, and you know that can only exist, ownership of a car or something like that you can't hold in your hand. Because like back in the day, someone would just it was might doesn't equal right was the big thing at the time. Like if you could take something from someone, then it was your right to have it because they should have been stronger, they should have been able to defend themselves, something like that. But now there's a possibility at least for growth and like wealth to generational wealth to exist and things like that. So it sounds like Mill took it in the opposite direction of, well, if we just trust everybody, because Rousseau was worried that if we did what Mill was talking about, and Karl Marx brought it to another level as well, then the individual would become so involved with themselves that they wouldn't care about the community anymore if they had every freedom to do whatever they want. So I feel like nowadays we're in a situation that's more Rousseauian in that, you have your freedoms, but you can't do whatever you want. Like for example, in situationally murder, you and I could both consider killing somebody. If someone kills your whole family, it would seem like it's perfectly sound to kill them too. But that's not the way we do it in the judicial system here, right? I mean, people get put to death, but you're not allowed to seek vengeance on someone until they've been proven. And even when they are proven guilty, they go through the system, the rehabilitation system, right? They go to jail, they go to prison, they suffer in that way for what they've done. And we've concluded as a society over time that that's the moral right thing to do in any situation. Yeah, I mean, like, it's really complicated shit, right? Working out a society, and everyone's got different opinions, and and now I feel like it made me wonder, when is the next book gonna come that someone writes, some modern day philosopher that goes, no, this way doesn't work. Let's do it this way. Because there seemed to be during that time. I mean, like, it's funny, you look up these people, it always says, like, I looked up Hobbes and it was like writer, poet, philosopher, political theorist, Senate member, or a diplomat rather, lawyer. And you're like, okay, so people just they did the everything. Arts and were different then. People really cared and pursued those things. And I think that happens now, but maybe it's just the water is muddier. Like, it used to be just only elite thinkers, and this is what Nietzsche was afraid of when the printing press got invented. He was like, what, everyone's gonna read now?
Everyone's a writer?
Any asshole can read a book?
Right.
That's not right, So I guess that's kind of what it's like with Pro Tools technology now. Like, anybody can make an album. Does that necessarily mean that every album that gets made is good? No.
Yeah. But that brings up a good point of, where does the next great,
like, where do you think it would go? What would you change?
And you know what I think, and this might sound a bit ridiculous to think, but I actually think it's going to come from podcasting, right? Because I think, and it's going to come from this podcast in particular. No, but you
never know, man.
I mean, I think it's as revolutionary of a form of media as the printing press, because it allows people to broadcast their opinions and virtually face no repercussions if obviously people can still get canceled and everything, but like I'm not saying Joe Rogan will be looked at as like in history. They'll talk about
Jean-Jacque Rousseau.
He'll be in history textbooks of the Joe Rogan experience. But like things, I mean, he really was the pioneer in being able to have long form conversations.
Right.
So he kind of invented almost a form of like a book that had never existed before. Now he is producing a digital footprint of 3-hour conversations with the history's greatest, most successful people. Mm-hmm. And it may not be Joe Rogan per se or any of his guests, but it might be someone, the act of being able to think through things for hours on end and discuss them and have them, have them kind of have to defend them against other people who are questioning them. I think that is kind of where it's coming from. I don't know if it's going to be a book necessarily that someone comes out with or an article that changes history. I think it's more so the form of podcasting, because I heard a quote from Patrick Bet-David where he said he was talking about pros versus amateurs and how it's usually the amateurs who actually end up doing the breakthrough things in society over time. He said pros built the Titanic. Look what happened there. Amateurs built, Noah's Ark. He said pros built mainstream media. Amateurs built podcasting. Right. And like he provided.
Well, that's the people. That goes back to the idea of the people in the Rousseauian sense. Like, the people should have the say. The people should make the difference. He actually says in the book too, once a government gets to a point that's tyrannical or, it's not working out, it's actually our job now to refuse to take part in this system. And people talk about that, like, we should boycott the government and just refuse to pay taxes and stuff like that. But in his theory, that is what comes next.
Yeah, and I think I'm sure everyone who lives in a politically, volatile time kind of thinks this, but I really do think we're only 30 something years old, so we don't have the context of, decades of American history necessarily. But I really do think it seems like from older people we talk to, now is one of the most contentious times in our country's,
Correct.
Recent history in the last 100 years at least. I'm sure there's been plenty of other pivotal times, civil rights and everything, but it really seems like now is kind of a breaking point of people are fed up, man. People are fed up with the politicians that are being
and
offered
the French,
to us.
like, to bring them back into this. I mean, he was Genevan, by the way, or Swiss, however you want to look at it, but hugely influential in France. And the French right now, have you seen those videos of the farmers just blasting diarrhea and manure all over the government buildings because the taxes are too high on farmers? And they're literally just like, yo, like, we're literally going to cover you in cow shit.
Yeah.
Because fuck you, Like, they know how to do this, right? But like, and it doesn't always work out. But in the end, like, I think they just have more of an understanding that it really is up to the people. Like, we're very busy here. We're always going to work. We're always doing something. We're always heading to some other place or whatever. But not that French people don't do that, but like, I just think they get it a little more as like far as like what democracy is, like what your role as a citizen is in this thing, And getting back to where government might be going in a revolutionary sense with podcasting, I heard people talking about what about an AI government? Like, what about like, and this is Terminator kind of talk, right? This is like, apocalypse coming, but if you think about it that way, I mean, at least you'd have a way of, and again, I know it's like who controls the puppets, who controls the people who control the thing, though. I get that. Who programs the AI? Who gets to do that, right? But maybe it could come from a whole collective digital representation of what we all want in a general will kind of sense, and the AI will learn from that. And we've talked about Paperclip Galaxy and stuff like that on the show, but at least then it wouldn't be like people can get out of control with corruption and get out of control with, under the table handshakes between one politician to another or one corporate person to a politician, lobbying, things like that. It might be the way it ends up going is that we just have AI kind of govern, make laws, enforce them, and all that. Maybe it could go that way too.
I think, it's a weird... I mean, I think we're in such the early stages of AI that we don't really know what its capabilities are. But I think an AI assisted government is
sure.
Probably something that realistically is in our future.
Yeah.
Like it probably, if not already.
Well, we're all AI assisted at this point.
And like what I think about what was interesting of this book again was the fact that when you think philosophers, you think Marcus Aurelius and Aristotle in robes and stuff, speaking to the
like
people.
This only happened 1,000 years ago.
Speaking to the people on a rock, but like when but when you see like Hobbes and Alan Turing and all these guys, you realize like, oh, philosophy isn't just thinking about thinking.
Yeah, it's not just pondering your orb.
Yeah,
it's not that.
It's really about exploring and navigating human nature, why we do what we do, and like what purpose do we serve. Which I think is really interesting. And I think like an AI assisted government could perhaps take all of these philosophies of history's greatest thinkers, observe through data that's ingested into the AI, opinions of people, actually not opinions of people, but rather behaviors of people, and analyze it through data, right? Yeah. Aggregate the data of people. Make predictions about what, rather than these freaking, Siena College polls. Like, have you ever taken a poll in your life?
I've never done that.
Right. So like they say, oh, polls are indicating that America wants, legalized weed. And you're like, yeah, but who are you polling? And like, who's responding to these?
Exactly.
Whereas like an AI assisted could potentially, I don't know how they would do this, probably in some very creepy, not privacy compliant way of gathering data and being like, well, based on all the aggregated data across the country.
Right. It could be like, what is the average mean grocery that everyone, and they could work to make the prices of that particular thing the lowest.
Exactly.
Right? Something like that. Right.
Yeah. So it could be more efficient and speed up decisions, and assist in like some of these laws and like, do the people, support sending $60 billion of aid to some country in, Europe. Right. And like, it could be able to influence decisions in some way.
Correct. Maybe
politicians won't give a shit about it, but
right.
I think if people are given access to that data, which that's also a huge decision, it could be really beneficial. But also, obviously potentially dangerous. It's like fire.
Exactly. It's like fire. And, getting back to the people making decisions part, like there was never a part of the Rousseauian ideal that would have had like this is where the executive branch came in that, like, that's the idea of the executive branch we have now. The people would have been part of that. It wouldn't have been elected officials. It wouldn't have been elected people, because even then, there's a minority. He hated like the minority. Like what he wanted to do, in my opinion, from reading that, he wanted to just get rid of as many situations where there would be a minority as possible. So like when there's an elected official, that means someone didn't get who they wanted, right? And now this guy's not going to vote for the things that I want. He's not going to push the laws that I think matter. So the people, but again, it's not realistic in that. Think about how big this country is. We all have jobs. We're all busy. Like we can't go to these community meetings all the time and all be heard and all that stuff. So this is where he kind of fell apart. There's a lot of Rousseauian, people who didn't like him at all and thought that his ideas were ridiculous and whatever. And the reasons are, he did say things like the way that this would work the smoothest would be if a community was if homogeneity, being part of it, like everyone part of the same ethnicity, the same religion.
Oh, that's touchy.
Exactly. It's like, okay, so now what, there's going to be like, Blacktopia, Chinatown, white people live in this state. Like it's like the Adjustment Day kind of thing. That's a Chuck Palahniuk novel, but that is where the country ended up going. Was that like every ethnicity lived in their like district?
Right. There's like pockets.
Yeah. There's like pockets of just to avoid the cultural preferences, the whatever, the differences between people based on whatever history and all that. And who knows if that would be the best case scenario. Obviously, in America, that didn't seem to our forefathers to be the best way to do things because, maybe, look, everyone says that, tear down those statues, they were slave owners, but realistically, those guys knew that this had to stop. Even then, even though they had slaves, they knew that eventually this is going to go away. It has to go away. Rousseau even talked about that.
Some of them.
Yeah, look,
not all.
I'm sure some of them were horrendous, but the principles were this has to go away, but we can't snap our fingers and end slavery. It's been around since the beginning of time. This is going to take decades, if not hundreds of years, for it to really go away. I guess it's a matter of what ideas need to go away now. Like the idea of 90-year-old people being in Congress, that's got to stop. Mm-hmm. Like that's going to stop. Eventually, that'll be like, I feel like one of the main things in the future where, what is that? Term limits, Yeah, that should be the next thing.
Yeah, there's a minimum age, right? Like you don't want someone who's 25 running for president.
Exactly.
So you like in the same way, I don't want someone who's 85 running for president. I want someone who has the just conviction, hard work, vigor, and the energy and vitality to be able to handle that job and make those decisions. And like what you see right now in our elections, it's
oh my God, dude,
just the opposite of that. Yeah. It's the South Park, the shit sandwich,
the turd sandwich, and the giant douche.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. What's great is in that episode, I believe it's the giant douche gets called the giant douche. No, the turd sandwich calls the giant douche a turd sandwich, and then the giant douche goes, "No, if you'll pardon me, sir, you are a turd sandwich." Like it's a very funny because he is a turd sandwich. Right. South Park never misses.
They're the best.
They never miss. But yeah, it's very interesting shit, man. Because like we talked about, it's the more things change, it's almost like the more they stay the same. We're still in this endeavor to the more things. You ever heard that? You've never heard that expression?
Of course I have.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
The more things change, the more they stay the same. We're still figuring out this thing, and maybe that's just the human condition, but
yeah, and like there's some philosophers who talk about that, just like human nature never changes, so we should create rules in society that affect human nature. Yeah,
it doesn't, but the thinking about it does. Going back to the guys before,
well,
Rousseau,
it's like I said with like Freud, he was the first person to be like, your subconscious thoughts dictate your behavior. Some people were like, huh?
Right.
And like, think about, he said that in the late 1800s or early 1900s, and therapy hasn't started to become a normalized thing until the last 10 years. Like that took 100 years. Even,
yeah. That planting a tree, you'll never sit under the shade. Right. That whole thing. But the people before Rousseau who had political ideas, and theories of their own, they thought that the natural hierarchy was a real thing. Like the king and queen were superior, possessed godlike wisdom you'll never possess. And that was actually the way, because of the format of societies, that people just assumed things were. Like they must be so important. They must be...
Right.
These people,
yeah, like back in the day when you had like 13-year-old emperors, because they were just like the next surviving kin of the.
And people believed that was real. They believed in natural hierarchy. It was called.
Could you imagine that? Just a kid like going through puberty and like leading this country.
Right. He's just like.
And we just praised him like, oh, he's Biden's son. He must be.
He's rubbing his dick up against a couch in the castle, and he's making
sex tapes in the Capitol building.
Beheaded. Yeah, dude, the sex tape in the fucking. Can you believe this shit? I mean, it's crazy. I mean, like, again, we talked about it.
Yeah, but you know what? Like, the news cycle now is just so... I mean, it always has been, but like, when I see that, I'm not even shocked.
I was at first,
I'm so like desensitized to some of these stories now that I'm just like, yep, all right, and flip the page. Like, mortgage rates are high again. Like,
right.
It's just...
Exactly. All right, well, I read your blog post about... I forgot the title of it already.
Time Confetti.
Time Confetti.
Yeah.
I think that's interesting. Go on.
Yeah. So I was listening to a podcast, I think with Adam Grant, who's a psychologist, professor at Penn. He's written tons of great books. And he talked about this idea of time confetti, which I'd never heard that term before.
Yeah, I love it though.
And I kind of like perked up when I heard it. But it's basically this idea that we're constantly with emails, texts, and social media, where our time is constantly being sliced into these tiny pieces that we're not actually enjoying, right? Like if I'm talking to you right now and I get a text, all of a sudden I'm disengaged in the conversation. And now I'm thinking about this text, and maybe, okay, I'm not going to answer it now. I'll get back to them later. Okay, someone's in trouble, whatever, blah, blah, blah. Okay, now I'm going to talk back to you again, but it's this idea that's also called attention residue, which is basically, well, now my attention is divided. I'm thinking about that text and also trying to talk to you about Rousseauian ideas, but like I can't focus fully on either. And he says now in this digital world where we have so many productivity tools and like all of these things that are available at our fingertips, our attention is almost never focused solely on what we're doing. Like our attention is always divided. And he said the average person checks their email 74 times a day, which is nuts. And on average, when you get interrupted by something, whether it's a text message or a phone call, and let's say you were working on a project and then you get a phone call and you answer it. It's a dentist appointment, you got to go. On average, to get back to that task, to get fully back to focus, takes 23 minutes. And think about the average, you don't even have to be an office worker checking emails. If you have a phone on you, it's almost natural. You're always going to be distracted in some way unless you put it on airplane mode and you're fully focused. But yeah, I just thought it was such an interesting concept that, time confetti, like that's a very visual thing to think about. And now, I always try different ways, but like these phones are designed by literal experts. They go to like casinos to understand human psychology of how they can get you hooked to get alerts and notifications and just like scrolling and make likability to make you never leave that app and be on your phone endlessly. So we, like as individuals, have to be prescriptive and intentional in how we avoid those notifications and how we avoid the time suck of getting sucked into it. Because if it takes you 23 minutes to get re-engaged in the activity, you only have 24 hours in a day. Like how many times you're getting sliced, your attention's getting sliced at least 10, 20 times every single day. And how can you do your job effectively or do whatever task you're trying to do effectively? Yeah.
Attention's the new currency, they say.
Yeah.
And it is. I mean, like, obviously, like I love those videos, for example, of people trying to like throw a straw across the room to have it land perfectly on a needle that's sticking out of the ground. And like, what's great about that is that they almost make it every time. It's like gambling in that way. And those guys, I forgot the something brothers.
Dude Perfect or?
No, it's a different group of dudes, but like every video has got 500,000 likes.
Yeah.
Views is in the millions, right? But think about the ads. I mean, if 500, at least 1 million people are looking at this every day, multiple times a day. I mean, like that is where Coca-Cola wants to put their thing or whatever, right? And I mean, that's so outdated, but like, yeah, I mean, that's the new thing everyone's looking at. So like, I wonder if there's anything we can do about that though, because like I've always wanted to find if there's like a comprehensive study that's been done about the general overall blanket of has social media and iPhones pros and cons. Like, you think about like how many good things have come from it, how many lives have been saved because they needed an Uber or something and it was freezing and like they couldn't get home and like they needed a ride, and without the phone they wouldn't have had the opportunity to do that and shit like that. Or like even learning certain things. Like, I just feel like you and I have the wherewithal to use our phones for a little bit better of the reason that the average person does. I mean, dude, the Candy Crush I see every goddamn day. And it's the same people just gigging, and they're on like level 600.
It's the people who walk directly into your chest when they're just like, dude, head down on the phone. Yeah.
But we have to acknowledge that not everyone's doing that, but a lot of people are doing that. But some people are also using this to learn about, you know, Rousseauian ideology and like political
Duolingo,
philosophy,
learn
and
another
like,
language.
And like, sure. So I wonder, like, is it all doomsday, or is it ultimately going to pan out to be a good thing? I wonder, you know?
I think I have a theory that I just made up on the spot that most like positive apps have a shelf life of positivity of about 6 years, right? Facebook first came out. Everyone could connect in college. You could know what the person across campus was doing, and you could message them and hang out and learn more about where they came from, right? 6 years go by. The like button gets introduced. All of a sudden, suicide, depression, people comparing each other. Instagram, same thing. People, first 6 years, sharing pictures of, you know, their dog and like the sunset, you know. Year seven, all of a sudden it's you know, porn is on. It's like, you know, people just posting clips of random stuff all the time, of videos of straws and everything. And I'm not to say that's for all. There's obviously like
there's entertainment. You know,
YouTube has an amazing shelf life of how long that's been providing positive stuff. But yeah, I think it's it's on the individual, and I think a lot of people don't realize like these apps are basically controlling you. When you're in these platforms, when you're on TikTok, when you're on YouTube, when you're on Instagram, you're being controlled by the app.
Yeah. TikTok's especially
and you may
bad.
not think it. You can probably multitask pretty well for a reasonable amount of time, but that time suck of like 30 minutes, it's taking all your attention away.
Yeah.
And you forget what you were doing. You open up Instagram for like 2 seconds and you forget what the hell you were doing 2 seconds earlier.
Yeah.
And I think what you have to do is just be really mindful and like set traps for yourself almost.
Right.
Like same thing with like junk food, right? Like out of sight, out of mind. If there's Doritos on the counter, I'm going to eat them.
Right.
But if I put them in the top shelf behind the boxes, I don't. So it's like I'm controlling because I know my behavior is going to be to eat the chips. Mm-hmm. And the same thing with social media. If I set a time limit for 30 minutes on Instagram every day, or if I put my phone on airplane mode or grayscale or whatever it is, I'm basically controlling my future self. So you have to almost do favors for your future self to control yourself. Like this morning I wanted to write, and yesterday morning I wanted to write, and there was two different ways I went about it. Yesterday morning I wanted to write, so I did all of these things that were going to get me in the right mood to write. And, you know, I made a cup of coffee, I came upstairs, turned on the lights, put on a candle, put on a playlist to write, you know, got all my tabs closed and opened up the writing document. And then I was like, oh, you know what? Let me check my phone's notes tabs to see if there's anything inspirational in there that I can write about. And I did all of these prerequisites before I actually got to the writing. And what I realized is like, oh no, like I'm trying to procrastinate myself, and also I'm trying to like use other tools to help me be productive.
Yeah.
This morning, on the other hand, put my phone in airplane mode, threw it on the couch, and just started writing.
Yeah.
Because I was writing this article, I knew like I have to control myself and just turn off and eliminate all the distractions. And one thing I wrote in there was like, the way to go about being more productive or reducing your time, Confetti, is not to add more things, not to add another productivity app on your phone. Yeah. It's actually to just eliminate distractions. And that's how you can get more focused and be more engaged in things.
Right. It almost goes back to like social media, society, you know, what we were just talking about. You know, all these guys acknowledge the fact that you have to do your part as the individual here. You have to put in your effort to sacrifice things that you want personally for the greater good. And meaning that like, you sacrifice certain things so that you would be in the mood to write. You put things away and whatever. Oh, well, and that didn't work, but ultimately you just got rid of your phone and you just sat down and had the discipline to just do this thing, right? Like that was the ask during this. I mean, social media society, that's like the modern day version in a way. Like there's a whole world. There is societies on these apps like Instagram and TikTok and Twitter and stuff. And there aren't enough people doing their part in the way of not letting these things control you. Like they're using them for kind of selfish reasons and they're getting their endorphin releases through like, Candy Crush and all that shit. But, these tools are like, I'm not trying to sound like, you can read, a Rousseauian novel on, an essay on political philosophy. You can do, not everyone's into that shit, but you have to be more, sacrificial with your time, like with your phone. I feel like you have to just put it away sometimes. Just do it, as Nike said. Just fucking do it.
And it's difficult. Like I try to manage it every day, but like you just have to be really intentional. Like
you have to be intentional.
For example, what I wrote about in the article was like when I started working in advertising, I prided myself on answering emails right away and responding to Slacks right away. And everyone was like, "Oh, Kyle, like you're such a fast responder. You're on the ball. You get everything done quickly." But I was burning myself out. I couldn't focus on big projects because I was just answering all these minutia emails all day. And after a while, my boss told me, he was like, "I only check my emails 3 times a day." And this is my boss who's like running a huge company, like so busy. And I'm like, how can you possibly do that? Don't you have a ton of important things? Like what if someone emails you at 9 and you don't check it for 3 hours? And he's like, if it's important, they'll call me.
Right.
Like nothing is urgent enough that it has to be responded to right away. And that changed my philosophy where he said, like, yeah, it's going to be a little bit uncomfortable. You're going to lose that reputation of being a fast responder, but like you're basically training the people you work with that, like he'll respond to me in a few hours, but maybe not right away. And that's a way to take back your freedom and your time. And I kind of do that. I call it batch processing, which is basically like setting aside a specific time or block to do the annoying shit. Right. So like when you text me, sometimes I don't answer for an hour. Right. And that's because I'm like, no, I hear the ping, but I'm like, no, now's my working time. Once that hour's up, then I'll look at my phone and I'll answer all my texts and check social media for 15 minutes, whatever it is. Once that 15 minutes or so is over, put my phone down, I'm back to working for an hour. And it's really hard to do because you might get important phone calls or important texts, but it's just a way to try to just be more intentional in how you allocate your time.
Yeah.
And it's hard it's a fine line between being like robotic about it, but being like disciplined. And it's tough. I struggle with it every day.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's that phenomenon. Like the more you try to prevent something, the more likely you are to cause it. Like you can take that out of control, and basically you've created an even more rigorous schedule in your life. Your time is, and now you're stressing yourself out about 15-minute time
increments. Yeah, which I've also done too. I've been guilty of that myself, and it's very tough. But really, like, I mean, every fucking self-help book or business book, like most successful people, it comes down to like how much can you focus your attention? And if you can focus your attention more than the average person on one specific thing, one skill, one, business opportunity, you'll be more, you don't have to be the smartest person. Like, the billionaire list isn't necessarily full of Harvard grads. It's more so full of people who focused maniacally on one thing. Right. And what the self-help thing I was saying was like most self-help books come down to just being fucking present. Yeah. And being engaged in something. Yeah. And the people who are most successful are the ones who find their skill, what they're really fucking good at, and what feels like play to them, because they can just go 24 hours straight, no sleep, and like focus on something. It's really hard to do. Like, have you ever tried just staring at a wall for like 30 seconds?
It's pretty tough.
It's really hard.
Yeah, it's pretty tough.
It's really hard.
It's harder than and it takes a lot longer. Like 30 seconds is a long time,
And it's like when you try to meditate for the first time, you realize like, holy shit, how many thoughts am I engaging in my head in a 30-second time span? It's wild.
I was going to ask you before we wrap up, since it's the end of the year, and it reminds me what I was going to say about myself. I was going to ask just a wrap up question of, shout out to Uncle Joe for all these, like, you know,
Joe's Couch.
Yeah, Joe's Couch, baby. I love it. What have you learned about yourself this year?
Ooh, I would say the biggest thing I've learned and improved on this year is I started taking therapy, which I talked about. And the biggest thing that I've really has improved my life drastically is really just the ability to pause before I do something. Even if it's 2 seconds, to pause before I say something, to pause before I act on an impulse, to pause before, I do any activity, because I think what therapy has taught me is so much of our lives are driven by just our subconscious thoughts, our impulses, things that we just like learned through childhood and we thought were, the normal ways of doing things. And you don't realize how much you're just being driven by your subconscious, and you're not actually like actively making decisions yourself with full autonomy. Sometimes you're almost being driven on autopilot. Like you're doing default things and not being smart and present and intentional in how you say things. So now I've really tried to, when I feel something, if like someone insults me, and usually I'd be just like, whatever, like water off my back. Now I actually try to pause for 2 seconds, notice, all right, where am I feeling this in my head, in my heart, in my gut, making decisions or something, and actually notice the feeling of like, ooh, that actually stung a little bit, or ooh, that made me angry, or that made me happy, whatever it is, and to act on it in a way that is a decision I'm making, and say, and like, I'll say it to the person, like, oh, you know what, that actually hurt me a little bit, or wow, I love that you said that, or, and like actually being more engaged. And I think, people have noticed it, and I've noticed it more in my relationships have gotten better. I've just been able to be smarter in my decisions and not act on impulses.
We talked about this before, but that I said, and Rousseau said, he put it this way, that's what makes you a human being, is your ability to do that.
Yeah.
Not to act on your guttural instinctual reactions, and to think for a moment and to go, what would be the best case scenario from this? Like, how can I act regardless of the way I feel like, and, just kind of, whether reaming this person out or screaming at them, fuck you, whatever. Your ability to do that is what makes you a moral being. A human being is your ability to be able to do that. And he wanted to base the society on that particular characteristic. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah, and my therapist calls it like investigating your beliefs. Like actually, like pretending you have like a magnifying glass and you're like Sherlock Holmes, and like actually investigating when you feel something. Let's say you get a like phone call from your mom or something, and you hang up and you're like annoyed for some reason. Or you want to say something that, whatever. Actually investigating, like, wait, why am I feeling this right now? Like, what happened? What am I saying to myself? And like just pausing to investigate those feelings and being like, is that true? If so, is my feeling valid? And it sounds like hokey pokey, but like it really has improved the quality of my life and like made me more at ease and at peace with my decisions.
That's good.
How about yourself?
What I learned about myself this year, and what you were just talking about brought it up, is I always thought that I had ADHD or ADD or something. Like, I don't know why I thought that. I guess because like I'm a certain way and I can be like a knucklehead, but I learned this year, because I've been quite busy with the show and other things that I'm doing with this kind of thing, and like having a daughter and all that. I'm actually quite capable of focusing on one thing, and I can do it for a long time. Like even when I come home and I only have, 2.5 hours with my daughter on like weekdays sometimes. I mean, I can just focus, I can put everything away and just play with her for that amount of time and eat with my wife and her at the table and really be present, And maybe I wasn't always acting that way, but maybe having a kid, it's something that you go, this is worth my time and focus. Like, this is really worth it. And then that teaches you how to take that way of treating something that is requiring your attention with purpose. Like you can really, she's taught me how to like put everything else away. Like we talked about time management a little bit. Like I did have a little bit of issues with that, but I've learned that I'm actually quite capable of doing that. I always thought that that was like a big obstacle for me, but I don't know if she changed me or if just growing up maybe. But it's nice to know that's in my arsenal. You know, I can really just kind of focus on shit. And yeah, that was a nice thing to learn about myself. It's a little like alleviating.
Yeah, you've talked about that before on like you didn't know you had the ability to do some of those things, and it's like a challenging thing that kind of makes you rise. It's the responsibility, right? Like you rise to that occasion.
Right.
I heard.
I just want to say to this. I'm sorry. Don't forget what you're about. You heard something.
Yeah, no, I got it. I got it.
Okay.
Thank you.
But there are guys I work with, right? Like they see me reading books and stuff like that, and then they're really nice about it. Like they're like, "That's really cool. Like, can you read me something from that?" And then sometimes I'll read them something, and they go, "Man, that just sounds like jargon to me. Like I have no clue what you just said. If I had to read that, I would definitely have to go back from the beginning and just reread it." And I said, like, you can do whatever you want. You know that, right? Like, unless you're like a woman or retarded, you can learn anything you want. But don't cut yourself short, man.
There goes our sponsorship.
Yeah, no, but I'm joking. Come on, it's the holidays. I'm joking. Dude, come on. It's fucking.
That was good.
I think the first NASA engineer who put one of the men on the moon was a woman. I'm joking, but like anyway, don't sell yourself short. Don't be afraid to change. Like just because you grew up in a house where you weren't necessarily the smartest kid in the world or whatever, like a lot of people suffer from this kind of like false idea of who they are. They hear words like from this book and they go, "Oh, I could never understand that." Right. It's like, of course you can. Yeah. Just give it the focus and attention it deserves. You can do anything you want, man.
Yeah, and I think people like to self-identify with some of these like diagnoses now of like, "Oh, I have ADHD or I have OCD."
Yeah, they like it. They're like, it's not depression. My fault. I have something,
Yeah, and I heard Dr. Gabor Mate, he talked about ADHD, and he was saying, like, a lot of people used to think it's like a chemical imbalance of some sort, or it's a disease, and his idea or his thought, I don't know if this is a theory or if it's been proven, but he basically said, like, when you're a kid and, something happens, you have two responses, right? It's fight or flight. He said there's actually a third response, which is disassociation.
Yeah.
Right. So when you see your parents fighting and arguing in the kitchen, you can fight or leave. Right. The other one is actually just disassociation, which is watching it happen and almost like tuning out. And that's what ADHDers, a lot of them tune out when they're in school. Right.
Yeah.
But really it's because it's not interesting to them. It's not something that they want to engage in. So you disassociate from it.
Yeah.
And like in your case, maybe there was things growing up that you thought you had ADHD because you just didn't care about them actually.
Yeah.
But it's when you find something that you truly care about and you can pour yourself into it, you can focus for days when it's something you actually care about. And I experience this sometimes with things in myself where I was like, do I have ADHD? Because like I couldn't focus at something for work, right? And I just like could not focus on it.
Yeah.
But it's really just like, I don't really have like a love for it.
Yeah.
But if it's writing or if it's doing this podcast or reading, like I could read for a whole year with no problem, no focus. But like watching a TV show, sometimes I tune out.
Well, but like, people have said to me though, like, "Oh, I can't read. Oh, I can't. No, I can, but I can't." Yes, you can. You just have to give yourself that month of doing it every day with diligence and focus, and you will become a better reader.
But again, some people may not like reading,
right?
And
but
maybe for them, I'm saying,
yes.
Like for me, I don't really like watching movies or TV shows. For some reason, I don't have the attention span for it.
Yeah. In this particular case, I'm talking about people who have said, "I wish I could read, I just can't." I'm like, no, you can, because I thought the same thing. And then you just do it, and like you get better at anything, like anything else. You get better, and you can do it.
I think so. A perfect example, and I'll end on this. But I actually just started doing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu.
You're kidding?
I did, yeah.
Oh God, it was a matter of time. Honestly,
another fucking hobby, another like Joe Rogan thing I'm adopting. But
give me 5 minutes on it.
It ties essentially into what we were just talking about, which is for me the thing I learned this year was like the ability to pause and like think and think rationally, and for you, it's kind of the ability to focus on things you care about, right? Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu to me, and sorry for Joe Rogan listeners or wives of Joe Rogan listeners who've heard this spiel, but like I started it a week ago, so I'm very new to it. But immediately you see, one, it's fucking challenging. Two, you really have to think quickly on your feet and make decisions like 10 moves in advance. So you have to be intentional in your thoughts and how you move your body, because there are physical consequences to it. You might get choked out. You might get your arm twisted or your leg broken in some way. So it's one of those techniques that's really taught me a lot about, again, I've been doing it for a week, but it is such a valuable tool, a skill set, not just physically. Like, sure, I hope to eventually be like a black belt and be able to kick anyone's ass, but it's more so about, one, becoming better at something that I suck at. And probably for the first 6 months, I'm just going to be getting choked out every single day, and it's going to suck. But eventually, once I get over that hump, I'm going to be so proud of myself for, one, having been able to go through that shitty 6 months of discomfort. And secondly, for being able to face that every single day, show up, focus on it, and just learn. It's really to learn more about myself, honestly. You learn so much about yourself in an hour and a half class of having to defend yourself against someone literally trying to harm you in some way.
Yeah. Well, you brought up Rogan, so he says it's chess with dire consequences.
It's exactly
that's what he said
like.
It is.
It feels like, if you've ever played a game of chess,
of course,
that is exactly what jiu-jitsu feels like physically. It's just, you're having to make, like, someone's got your arms pinned and you're thinking, okay, if I do this, he'll do that. If I do this, he'll do that. It's like you're thinking of all these different things, but you have to do it in rapid time.
That's a really exciting new endeavor, man. That's
cool.
Awesome.
Yeah,
is
cool.
the studio local? I'm just curious.
So our mutual friend Keith, he joined the next town over, and he started it a few months ago, and I was like, yeah, I've always wanted to do it. And he's like, well, come to a class with me tomorrow. And
that's awesome.
I had been to a few like introductory classes in Long Island City and in Manhattan, but they were like legit like MMA jiu-jitsu ones, and I was so intimidated, and I was like, fuck this is so hard. And this is the first one where it was like, you know, all people kind of like us, everyone's a white belt, everyone's just like working a normal job and just wants to learn jiu-jitsu. So it's way more low stakes. But yeah, I got a really good feeling that first class, and I was like, another fucking hobby that I'm going to go down the rabbit hole of. But
therapy, ice baths, and jiu-jitsu now.
Yeah.
That's great.
And fire department.
And the fire department. Yeah, I mean, forget it. Good for you, bro. That's a great year. All right, let's wrap it up.
Let's wrap it up. It's been a wonderful year.
It really has.
We've done 15 podcast episodes in, 13 months or something like that?
Something like that, yeah. 14 maybe.
Here's to a wonderful 2023, and happy holidays to everyone, and a happy new year.
Happy wonderful new year. Happy Christmas if you're English or British, and Merry Christmas. Happy holidays, blah, 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 blah. We'll see you next year with a couple of new surprises, I believe, a couple of new additions to the show, maybe.
Hopefully.
Yeah.
Thanks for tuning in, everyone.
Thank you.